What's up everyone? Alex here. Astria Ascending is a very sad game. Now, depending on who you are as a person, you can treat this very differently. For one, it could mean that Astria Ascending is a very melancholic game with a sad story that you kinda know is not gonna end well. You can also treat it as Astria Ascending isn't what I expected it to be, and that makes me sad. In my case, I actually think that both apply for Astria Ascending, and in ways that you probably didn't expect. I want to take this opportunity to thank Dear Villagers for providing this PS5 game code. I've had the game for about a week now, and these are my thoughts on it. The best way to start talking about this game, however, is what is apparent. It's got great graphics and an animation style that is reminiscent of the very best Vanillaware games, coupled with a soundtrack featuring Hitoshi Sakimoto. I have to point out that Hitoshi Sakimoto isn't the only composer of Astria Ascending. There are plenty others, but the soundscape feels cohesive and they all fit together neatly. And there are some really awesome compositions to boot. The characters themselves, when rendered on screen, aren't exactly 2D characters. They're actually fully 3D models, with characters being able to turn their heads as well. And that really surprised me, especially when I observed it later on in the game. But what this presentation betrays, however, is how insanely old school Astria Ascending really is. But before we get into that, I want to talk about the story. And as always, I'm not going to spoil a single thing except the premise, which you've probably already seen just by watching the trailers. You are in control of the 333rd Demigod Division. What makes these people special are that they're actually selected from the population in order to become demigods. And a lot of people see this as an honor, if you will. That basically means that they are sacrificing their life in order to protect the rest of the citizenry from the blight known as the noise. Unfortunately, this comes with a ton of caveats. For one, being a demigod means you're going to have all these incredible superpowers that regular people just don't have. What that also means is that your life will end after 3 years. When we join the 333rd, they only have 3 months left of their life, and the noise invasion continues to get rougher and tougher every single day. For the first 11 hours of the game, the storytelling kind of feels very Western-like. In other words, it's a lot less character development and a lot more plot-based progression. And even then, I feel like that's being generous, because I really only felt that the plot started to progress in a significant way after 11 or 12 hours of playtime. This is another way of saying that the story of Astria Ascending is a bit slow-paced at the very beginning, with the game taking moments of its time to introduce you to the different characters and how they became demigods. And while it's good backstory, it didn't really solve the biggest problem that I had with this cast. And that is, a lot of them really don't like each other. A lot of the time, they're very agitated and they really just want to get on with whatever mission they're doing, with some even saying that, well, you only have 3 months left to deal with that person. And that's certainly a bit off-putting, given that this team is supposed to be cohesive and work together in order to work towards a common goal. And I don't know about you, but I want to like my party members, and Astria Ascending's cast doesn't feel likable to me. Keep in mind, I'm not implying that every game should have likable characters, but give us good reason to do that. And I don't think Astria Ascending ever gave me a good reason. When I mentioned that the presentation of the game being modern betrays what the game really is, it's got more to do with what you're expecting the game to be as opposed to what it really is. Because Astria Ascending is an old school RPG. What that means is a lot of the conveniences that you've come to know in modern turn-based RPGs are simply not here. For example, there are moments of the game where there's voiced dialogue. You cannot skip these to make it go faster. And while some people will question why I want this option, it's because there are some pieces of voice dialogue whose dialogue windows last way too long, making me wish that I had an opportunity to make it advance manually.
You wanted to discuss something, Eco?
Yes, it's about the noises we defeated in town. They're supposed to be a unique type found only in my homeland of Vatira.
This also extends to battles, where you're not able to know who's going to go next in the turn order. In fact, there's no turn order at all that is displayed on screen. In addition to that, you need to use a spell or ability in order to look at enemies' weaknesses and resistances. This is actually super crucial because the game's focus system, which allows you to power up your character's attacks and skills, enhancing its damage, is solely reliant on knowing an enemy's weaknesses and resistances. In order to gain more focus, you need to hit an enemy with their weakness. Conversely, if they are resistant to the ability that you used, you will lose focus, and it is possible to get into the negatives as far as the focus goes. It's because of this that battles in Astria Ascending actually last longer than anticipated. You need to learn and master the focus system in order to make battles go quicker. Especially given that later on, enemies have AoE abilities that can either stun your party or confuse a huge chunk of them. Which is to say that the way that you kit up your character with armor and gear, you need to think about how to give them the proper resistances so that they can survive a journey through the dungeon. That being said, when Astria Ascending's combat works, it feels great. One of the earliest boss battles was super fun once I finally figured out how to use the focus system, and it certainly felt like status effects are very useful in this game. The input response is very snappy, so it definitely feels modern in that respect. With regards to knowing weaknesses and resistances, there is a setting in the options screen that allows you to actually turn on the ability to display weaknesses and resistances just by highlighting the enemy. What I found really fascinating is that this is an optional toggle, and I can't for the life of me figure out why they have it as such, as opposed to designing the game around this in such a fun manner that it was rewarding and engaging. Because I don't know about you, but scanning enemies is kind of a waste of a turn. And especially when a lot of modern JRPGs just allow you to highlight an enemy and click a button and see all the resistances, there's something to be said about that. Speaking of options, there is also a setting so that you can enable reserved party members to gain experience when they're not in the party. Again, it's one of those modern conveniences that somehow is a toggle. I suspect that the reason why these options exist is so that the game can slightly provide some sort of assistance for players who are used to those kinds of options, and I think it works for the most part. One side note that I want to add is that the PS4 version, which was also available to me, has a very long initial loading time. So if you're playing it on PS4, just keep this in mind. But I have to stress that the game is still very old school in many different ways. In fact, it does have a job system, which you can't really go any more old school than that. Each of the different job trees are so expansive that it certainly feels like you can customize the way that your character's stats and abilities are like. In fact, different nodes actually allow you to pick which stat you want to build up, and I thought that was actually really cool. Astria Ascending is a game that has the veneer of something modern and something familiar, with many of you comparing it to Vanillaware, for example, but having the heart and soul of an old school JRPG. And I want to make it clear that being an old school RPG isn't a bad thing. I think there's plenty of people who are looking for that sort of experience, and Astria Ascending, with its incredible presentation, really does achieve that. I think the biggest deterrent for me are the characters, actually. The fact that there's very little to like in an already dire story makes me sad. And while not everything needs to be a happy-go-lucky experience with people off to see the wizard and all that jazz, part of why I like JRPGs is knowing that there is a time for levity even in times of grief. But if you're a person who loves tinkering with gameplay, min-maxing for the best stats whatsoever, I think there's a lot to love here, especially if you're into the more old-school job systems with expansive systems. Astria Ascending is available on console and PC, and of course, it is available on Xbox Game Pass today. So if you have access to Game Pass and you're hankering for an old school RPG experience with a modern veneer, I recommend you check it out. At any rate, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.